Okay, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for this webinar about putting evidence to work in your setting. My name's Louise Asprey and I'm the director of Oldham Sixth Form College Associate Research School, and I've got Alex Galvin joining me from the SSAT today, and Paula Burrell, who's going to talk about Switch On Reading later on as well. And they are some of the funded projects that we've got going on, and the explanation will become clear as we go through the beginning part of this presentation. So these are the things that I'm going to be covering in the session today. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the work of the EEF and the work in terms of generation. We're going to look at how to identify a school improvement priority to make an evidence-informed decision about what you want to implement, as well as then giving you some information about how your school can get involved in EEF programs and research generation activities, and the importance of being involved as a school in the generation of research. So just to talk you through the EEF's mission, we work to improve academic outcomes for disadvantaged pupils between the age of 2 and 19. And we do this by supporting evidence use across the English education system. We try to equip practitioners, school leaders and policymakers with the knowledge of what works by commissioning and analysing educational research. So we really want to establish what we know already about boosting outcomes, about identifying and scaling up new approaches that can positively impact on learning, and more importantly, support schools, nurseries and colleges to put evidence to use very effectively in their settings. So the EEF is an independent organisation and really committed to transparency and being led solely by the evidence without fear or favour in any of those results. So just to give you a bit of background about disadvantage and the mission of the EEF, the historical attainment gap in England shows that when children start school at age 5, there's already those from disadvantaged backgrounds already are likely to be behind their classmates. And that gap just widens as they get through the rest of their school career. By the time they're 16, young people from disadvantaged backgrounds are much more likely to leave school without good GCSEs in maths and English. And even before the start of the pandemic, the progress towards closing that attainment gap slowed down in 2018-19, and that gap actually began to grow. And then, of course, during the pandemic, there's been a negative impact, a disproportionately negative impact on children and young people from disadvantaged backgrounds as well. So this has widened even further across all age groups. So at the EEF, we have a three-pronged approach. We look at evidence generation, which is what we're going to talk to you about in today's session, where we commission robust studies of educational programs to assess their actual impact on pupil progress. So there's lots of initiatives out there that will make very bold claims on their websites about how they improve outcomes. And what we seek to do is provide independent evaluations and present findings to teachers and leaders that you can trust and use to decide whether you want to invest in a new approach or not. We look at evidence synthesis, so we review the existing research base. We look at robust studies so that teachers and leaders can access information about teaching and learning, and those approaches that have proven to be effective in other classrooms. And then we look at evidence mobilisation, which is about producing and summarising research in order to support behaviour change in the system, but actually producing those summaries isn't enough. We work to bring the evidence to meet busy teachers and leaders, to produce resources that might help them make the research findings more accessible, such as our guidance reports, the tools that come with those, or courses that we run across the Research School network. So in terms of evidence generation, within this work, our key focus is really on identifying programs that are evidence-informed, that are widespread in the system, they show promise in boosting pupil outcomes, and we fund ideas that could be feasibly scaled up cost-effectively if they're shown to work. We've got really high standards for evidence generation. We favour robust trial conditions in order to protect the authenticity and the usefulness of the findings that we present to teachers and leaders. And we always commission independent evaluation teams to publish this work without fear or favour. So it doesn't matter what the outcome is. If it's a negative one, that will still be published. We won't only publish the results of those that have had positive impacts. So in terms of supporting the scale up, when we commission a trial of any programme, we want to find out that it's got a positive impact on outcomes. So if an intervention is shown to be effective and it's cost effective to do so, we'll support that scale up activity that allows that approach to be implemented in more classrooms across the country. And that's something that Alex and Paula are going to talk about later. That's exactly the programme that we're supporting at the moment. So there are two key examples here that might illustrate that for you that you might know about: the National Tutoring Programme and NELLI, the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. Both of these projects were proven to be effective in EF funded trials. They were subsequently scaled up to schools as part of the government's education recovery package. So we're continuing to support the most effective interventions to thrive and develop at scale. And we're doing that through promotion and through directly subsidising those programmes so that more schools can be involved. So today is about promoting those. And as part of that, we can talk to you about how those programmes are being subsidised. Typically, we fund about 80% of that programme. So thinking about it in your own schools and your own roles, we know that the evidence provides the best bets to help teachers and leaders make informed decisions in their settings. It helps us to decide between programmes and approaches that when we're looking about something that we might want to implement in our schools and colleges to address a specific problem. So if your problem that you're addressing at the moment, for example, is feedback, then what Alex is going to talk to you about in the second part of his presentation could be something that's very relevant for your school and something that you could be involved in. What it also allows us to do is to think about what we're going to stop doing. So the evidence allows us to look at what doesn't work so that we can sort of de-implement some of those practices as well. But we know that research can't tell us what to do in every circumstance. Everything works somewhere, nothing works everywhere. So we need to use our professional expertise and knowledge of our setting, our pupils and our communities to know what might work in those circumstances. And with those two together, that's when we get our evidence-informed practice. So the evidence that allows us to make choices about what could work when we take our own context and setting into account. And alongside that, it's not just about what we do, but it's about how we do that. So when we use evidence to inform our practice, it's really important to recognise how we're actually then going to implement that initiative to make sure it's got the best chance of success. So a key aspect of what we want schools to do to improve is to think about implementation as an ongoing event and an ongoing process rather than a single event. So this means when we're using evidence to inform our practice, we're carefully planning how those new initiatives will be introduced, how we're going to manage that change, what steps are needed to maximise the chance of success. And often the who, the why, where and how, those are the kinds of things that are overlooked during those attempts to improve outcomes, which means implementation often feels like an add-on task. And that's when projects that are initiated with the best of intentions can fade away because we then struggle to manage those competing priorities. So the EEF's guidance on implementation tries to describe and demystify some of the professional practice of implementation. So this in itself is from a systematic review of the evidence around implementation planning, and it gives us 6 recommendations to support schools in the process of planning initiatives and implementing that successfully. And we're going to focus on just one aspect of that today, which is recommendation 3, which is how we'll define our problem that we want to solve and identify an appropriate programme or practice to implement. And that's what we're going to focus on in the next part of this session, before I then lead you on to how we can look at some funded trials and programmes that you might want to be involved in. So when we think about our priorities, it can be really hard to narrow down our priorities from a very big list of competing demands in a school. And it can be really tempting to juggle and address multiple different areas of focus at the same time. What the evidence shows us, though, is that a vital principle of good implementation is do fewer things, but do them better. So by focusing on fewer things, we can really invest the time and the energy and the resources we need to implement something successfully and make sure it's effectively sustained and embedded over time. If we're going to work towards fewer initiatives at any given time, though, it's even more important to accurately identify which from all of the competing potential priorities, which ones are the few things that will make the biggest difference to the pupils that we work with. So when we think of our explore phase of the implementation process, this can really help us do that, about thinking about a priority that's amenable to change, something that we can actually make a difference with, that we systematically explore the programs or practices that we seek to implement. And that's where the evidence provides us with those best bets to help make an informed decision about that. So it might help us decide between programs and approaches that we're looking to implement and stop doing the ones that aren't going to fit that context. And it allows us to think about the fit and feasibility within our school context as well. So step one in identifying a priority is to use a robust diagnostic process to really think about what the most pressing priority is in your school, the thing that's going to make the biggest difference for your particular context. And one of the best ways to ensure that you can be really confident as a school leader that you've identified the right priority, something that's going to make a real meaningful difference in your context, is to consider a range of data and then triangulate that data. So data from multiple sources allows us to compare and contrast those kind of hunches that we might have and the suggested ideas and around that and the evidence that we can use. So we need to look at multiple sources of data. So we move from those initial perceptions about what we think the problem is to being really confident that the issue is a priority. And this is a tool that's available on the EEF Schools Guide to Implementation. There's a series of tools there that you can download, and we'll send all these out, these links out with the recording as well. But this is a really useful tool to use in diagnosing your problem, so that when we think about gathering and interpreting data, we think about how we can confidently identify a priority, how that we gather data that's fit for purpose. That then allows us to provide a credible and plausible interpretation, and that we also think about the weaknesses in that data as well before we think about how we interpret that. So if we take this as our first step in that, the first point is that identifying a priority may well begin with a hunch. That's often what it begins with. We have some idea about what we think the problem might be in our classrooms or with our results. And it's probably reflective of our initial analysis of our context as a very experienced school leader. But the important thing is that we then further investigate these hunches to verify them, to gather and interpret relevant data. So basically, we need to think about how can we gain the information we need to find out whether our initial hunch is correct or not. And depending on what our hunch is, this will inform the kind of data that we're looking at to confirm this. So just as an example here, we've just got this very small case study, really, that exemplifies this stage within identifying priorities. So it's a fictionalized example, but it's drawn on examples from real schools and teachers and leaders from our Schools Planning Guide 2022 to 23 that was called Moving Forwards, Making a Difference. So here you can see that the school leader in this example has started with a hunch that there were some pupils that were making less than expected progress in maths. Then they've dug a little bit deeper into it. They've used progress and achievement data, lesson observations, teacher feedback to identify specific groups of pupils whose progress is slowed. So they know it's not all pupils, they've identified a small number of pupils. And then digging a little deeper into this initial hunch, they've suggested that this is an avenue for potential interest that they can explore in greater depth. And that can be done by then moving into step 2 of our gathering and interpreting data sheets. So if I move on to that, This second part of the tool is particularly useful, I think, as it shares some of the different types of data that we can use to build a really rich picture of the specific context that we're in. So you can see here that there's a range of data sources, and for each there are a series of prompts that support reflections around the strengths and potential challenges in each source of data and how you might then actually use that well. And I think what it highlights is the importance of triangulation of data. So using more than one data source to help identify any trends and patterns, to see whether there's any points of interest that in one data source that might then be confirmed by another data source. And the data that you choose might depend entirely on the kind of priority that you've identified. So again, if I give you this as an example, I'm just going to give you a minute to read that. So you can see here in this slide how that initial data gathering that they've done has moved on from that initial hunch that they've had in step one. We can see here that the school leader is following their initial line of inquiry still, but they're collecting multiple sources of evidence to build up a really rich and accurate picture of their current provision. So as the issue that the school leader is exploring appears to lie within maths, they've audited their provision using that RAG rating self-assessment tool that's part of the Improving Maths at Key Stage 2 and 3 guidance report. So the guidance reports often have these additional tools that you can use to do some auditing. And they've used that information then to identify the strengths and potential areas for development. So in this example, you can see that by using that audit tool, it's suggested that practice in relation to recommendation 6 of that guidance report, which is use tasks to challenge and support pupils' mathematics, they've identified that that is an area that could be further developed. They've then sought further information to confirm those initial assessments. They've looked at tasks, samples of work, learning walks, and talking with a range of staff and pupils. What we then need to think about is the weaknesses in our data. So once you've gathered that data, step 3 offers the prompts to help us to interpret that. And that's about identifying any potential weaknesses so that we can acknowledge those and take those into account when we're making our judgments about what priority we might have. So that might include whether your data is susceptible to bias. So if it's internal marking, it could be susceptible to bias, and that might influence your analysis and cause some inaccurate or misleading interpretations. So the common issues to look out for here are whether there are any significant gaps in your data. Are there data sets that are very small in their response rates, or any groups that are overrepresented? So is it a particular group of parents that are filling in your parent surveys and you're not getting a representative sample? It might be that there's very small response numbers that influence that. And we also need to consider whether the data is actually measuring what we're trying to find out. So is it precise enough? If we're asking survey questions, are we asking the right questions in the right way? Is it going to give us the information we need? And are we prioritizing the most relevant and rigorous data? Are we looking in the right places? And finally, is it manageable? You know, are we thinking about the trade-off between the workload and the richness of the data? So a survey is much easier than an interview, for example. So, and again, from that, are we then triangulating that data rather than limiting it to a low number of sources? And then this example, again, gives us an illustration of what it could look like in practice. So an acknowledgement that when reviewing the data they collected, the leadership team realised there were relatively small numbers in response to a parent survey, that the parents that were responding were in one year group. It was mostly year 7 pupils in this example. It didn't represent the views of everybody. So we don't discount this data altogether, but you need to consider that and those response rates when you're thinking about what that pattern is showing you. And then finally, we need to think about our credible and plausible interpretation. So sometimes we collect a lot of data to try and make sure we've got everything we might need, but we don't actually then use that very well to inform our decision making. So there's a lot of guidance in this section, but really the key things are: try to avoid fitting the data to your preconceptions, start with the data and let it reveal the nature of the issue to you, and test your thinking and identify the weaknesses in that data, and share it with people that might disagree with you. They're often the best people for you to go to when you've got your data, because they will provide a different perspective on it. And in this example here, the leaders have reviewed each source of data independently, and then they've compared them as a team. So what they've really done is a very sort of analytical triangulation of that data. They've reflected on whether the same messages are emerging from that data to help them be more confident that they are actually identifying a priority that is a reliable interpretation of that data. So once we've thought about our data and we've identified that we've got that priority that's amenable to change, we're then thinking about systematically exploring the programs or practices that we might want to implement. So that's the next step in our explore phase, really. And if the previous step can be seen as identifying the problem of the practice, this step is about the possible treatments for that problem and the solutions that might help us to address that problem. So to help school leaders and teachers build a really rich evidence picture to assess the evidence that might help them, there's just some resources here that I want to highlight to you. On the EEF website, we've got the toolkit there. There are hyperlinks to all of these that when you get the video later. We've got accompanying resources, so every guidance report has tools and other resources that you can use to support that. And as well as the teaching and learning toolkit, we've now got the early years toolkit. You can also look further afield to articles, books, project reports of initiatives that have taken place elsewhere, but these sources are really reliable sources. And again, this example is taken from Moving Forwards, Making a Difference, the school planning guide from 22-23. And here you can see that the school's leadership team have reviewed different research evidence and practice guidance around their priority that they'd identified to help them understand the effective practice in relation to this. So they've looked at different sources like the Teaching and Learning Toolkit, Rosenshine's principles, the cognitive load theory, and they've drawn on the EEF's evidence review of cognitive science as well. So it's really important for us to think about that whole evidence picture and draw on some different sources to then critique them and understand the evidence that you've read, as well as then that expert understanding of pupils and colleagues and our school context that you're working with. So in this example, they considered different programs, how those approaches might be appropriate to address the priorities that they'd identified, and the advantages and challenges of using that particular program, particularly in relation to workload and resourcing and professional development. So again, if I go back to the guidance, once we know what our priority is and we've explored possible interventions to implement, then that isn't all there is to know about putting evidence to work. We need to consider the other recommendations within there. So to complement the guidance, on the EEF website, you'll get lots of additional information and tools. There's an audit tool, there's planning templates, there's worked examples from other schools. And we'd really encourage you to look to develop this aspect of your practice, to explore it, to contact your local research school if you want to discuss that support any further. But schools having this available to them and really understanding implementation planning is the thing that is going to make the change in the initiative more successful. So to support schools to get a better understanding of the way the EEF can potentially help you to identify programs and projects, we're going to move on in a minute to looking at some really exciting opportunities that are available for application at the moment. So the second part of the webinar will be to talk you through two particular programs, and then I'm going to outline all the other programs that are available for secondary schools. But what we do is research generation activity, which is trials, and also accessing programs that have previously been tried by the EEF and have been found to have positive outcomes on pupil attainment. So you can sign up to receive some of the programs that have already been tested by the EEF that have been shown to have positive impact. We're supporting a couple of programs for secondaries that we're going to outline today that we've trialled previously, where there's been a positive impact on pupil attainment compared to the control groups. And we're looking to scale these up. And the EEF is subsidising the cost of these programmes so that schools that sign up will pay a lower price than usual. Typically, we fund between 75 and 80% of that programme cost. All schools that sign up will receive the programme. And there are typically either no evaluation or minimal evaluation requirements as well, because the focus is on scaling up good practice rather than further evidence generation. So it's a fantastic opportunity for schools to access tried and tested programs as part of our mission of scaling up what we find to be effective in raising programs. So these are called our subsidised programs. We're also running a large number of trials, both at efficacy and effectiveness levels, programs that show promise in raising attainment in maths, literacy or science, for example, to build up the evidence base, but there are more examples than that. And we're signing up schools to take part in these trials. And often these schools are the first to access promising programs that aren't actually widely available. So the trials are different to the subsidised programs. With the subsidised programs, you get everybody that signs up gets access to that programme. And Paula and Alex are going to talk you through the two programmes we've got available to secondaries. And then I'm going to talk you through some of the trials that are available. But just to be aware of the trials, the EEF trials test the impact of particular programmes on pupil outcomes. And the programmes we test show promise for raising pupil attainment. So we've got some prior evidence already, and the content aligns with that broader evidence, but we only know with more certainty the impact on pupil attainment if we do more testing in this way. So schools that sign up to a trial will either be allocated to the intervention group or the control group as part of a randomised controlled trial. So the intervention group will receive the programme, including relevant training materials at a heavily discounted or free rate. And then the schools that are allocated to the control group will go about business as normal, but once all the research requirements are completed, they will receive a payment, a small payment at the end of the trial for being part of that. So even if you are involved as a control group, you will receive something. So I think in terms of trials particularly, we need to think about the benefits of taking part in a trial, because, you know, there are concerns about being allocated or not allocated as part of that. So the benefits are you will get the approach at a heavily subsidised rate. We fund most of the cost of the programme in a test, so that if you're in that intervention group, you get access to that programme for free or at a heavily subsidised cost. We sometimes ask schools to contribute a small amount to that, but you'd know that once you read the detail of the programme you wanted to sign up to. You have access to professional development for your staff. Most of the projects involve really high quality professional development and support. So taking part in the intervention group means you're part of that. And I think most importantly, you are contributing to the evidence base and support that your colleagues can use to improve teaching and learning. Over half of all schools in England have taken part in an EEF trial, and every one of them has made a valuable and long-term contribution to the education evidence base by supporting the profession to improve teaching and learning through better use of evidence. So it is really important that we have these trials that we can report on, so we know what it is that works, and we as schools can invest our time in the things that work and stop doing the things that don't. So there are a few things for you to think about. So based on what I've told you about implementation planning and identifying a problem and a solution that you might want to consider, you need to think about, how am I going to choose which project to be involved in? And that's why it's really important to have a really sharp focus on diagnosing need and choosing the right programme to support your school improvement priorities. But it's also important to consider what type of project you'd be happy to be involved in, particularly for trials. It's really important to know that you've got a 50% chance of being allocated to a control group. Subsidised programmes might be attractive to schools who are less secure about trial commitment and who are looking to secure the best bets based on previous evidence. And so I'm going to hand over to Alex and Paula in a minute to talk about their particular projects. We've got 15 projects recruiting schools this academic year. I'll show a full list of those projects at the end of the presentation, and we'll circulate that too. But for now, I've got Alex, who's going to go first, and then Paula. So Alex is from the SSAT, and she's going to be talking to you about embedding formative assessment. And we can take some questions and answers. As part of that, I will monitor the chat. I've seen a couple of questions have come in already. And then Paul is going to be talking about switch on reading, just to give you an idea about the kinds of projects based on these specific examples. So Alex, I'll mute now and I'll hand over to you. And just tell me when you want me to move the slides on.
Thank you very much, Louise. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alex Galvin. I'm one of the senior education leads at SSAT, and very happy to be here this afternoon just to tell you a little bit about embedding formative assessment. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but there's lots more information available on our website. And if you think it might be something you're interested in, then you can book a completely sort of open conversation with a member of our team. No pressure to get involved, but lots of opportunities to find out more. As Louise mentioned, embedding formative assessment is one of the projects that's been scaled up by the EEF following a research trial which published in 2019, which found that embedding formative assessment did have a demonstrable impact on pupil progress, which Dylan Williams' analysis suggests is about up to a 25% increase in learning. Embedding formative assessment focuses on supporting student engagement, supporting our ability to respond to student learning needs as learning takes place. And it has a really strong evidence base, being based on the work of Dylan Williams over several decades now, but also decades before that work looking at formative assessment and its potential to improve teaching and learning. I want to go on to the next one, please, Louise. So just to explain how the project works, it is a 2-year commitment, and it's based around what we call teacher learning communities. So essentially every month, if you were involved in the programme, groups of your staff, and it needs to be all staff involved, all teaching staff, meet for 75 minutes in a teacher learning community to work through a programme of support. That process is deliberately 2 years long because the focus of this is very much on embedding this practice. It's about bringing about meaningful change in the way that people are working. Through this process, schools are fully supported by an EFA mentor who checks in regularly with whoever is leading the project for the school. And there's a huge wealth of resources available to schools involved in this. All of the sessions are fully planned, resourced, and the agendas are provided. And behind that, there's a lot of extra resource which we allocate to schools depending on what people's particular areas of interest are. The EFA mentor comes into school at the beginning of the process, provides training for the people who'll be leading the teacher learning communities and the leadership team, and then that conversation continues throughout the whole of the 2 years to ensure that everybody receives the support they need to be able to implement the programme in the way that it's planned. I want to go on to the next one. So in terms of the content, this project is unashamedly about the day-to-day, about ordinary teaching and learning, everyday lessons, about the kinds of practices that really make a difference in the classroom and really help to improve teachers' teaching and students' abilities to learn. A lot of the things that you might hear spoken about, you might well have heard about before, and that's not That's not a surprise to anybody, but this is about ensuring that this is as good as it possibly can be. We know that formative assessment makes a real difference in the classroom. This is about ensuring that all of your teachers have the skills they need to do this really, really well and to do this consistently. So it is looking at understanding what we know about how students are learning, how we make use of evidence of how students are progressing, thinking really carefully about feedback, thinking about how students can support each other's learning. So as I say, it's very much about the things that happen every day in every classroom in your school, and about the little changes that might be able to be made to make a difference there. Okay, Louise, do you want to go? What's really, really key to this is habit change. And we know it's incredibly difficult to change habits, whether you're talking about personal or professional habits. And so there's been a lot of research and a lot of careful thought that's gone into how teachers can be supported to implement the things that we know work. There are a few key principles that are absolutely essential here. This is not the kind of project where everybody is doing the same thing. This is not the kind of project where if you sign up, your teachers will be told this week you have to go away and do this. There's a very strong element of choice in this. So teachers are deciding what they want to prioritize, what's right for their professional practice, how they want to develop their own learning. There's a lot of flexibility, so that you might have some teachers who spend a long time really focusing on a particular element, maybe something like questioning or feedback, and they might spend a long time exploring that in their particular context. Others may want to switch around. Every teacher within the programme has a lot of agency to decide about what will work best for them and what their needs are. There's also a really important emphasis on small steps. This isn't about asking everybody to change lots of things overnight. In fact, people are actively discouraged from trying to do that. It's about thinking about the little steps that people can take and about trying things and finding out what works. As Louise said, I think very rightly, nothing works for everybody, and this absolutely recognizes that you know what maybe will have a big impact for one person might be different in another classroom. Throughout the process, everybody within this, all your teachers have a strong degree of accountability, but not to us, not to the project as a whole, to each other. And that has also been really key in thinking about how this habit change process takes place. So all of the teacher learning communities or workshops, and you can choose your own name for them as you see fit, follow the structure you can see here, that each session is set out with clear learning intentions, time for all of the members of staff to share what they've been doing since the last meeting, then some new learning, and as I say, the agendas and all the resources are provided, and then time for every individual member of staff to plan what they're going to go away and do next. So you've got that continual cycle over the 2 years of people coming into the teacher learning communities, knowing how they work, knowing what to expect, and knowing that their own learning, their own experiences is going to be really key to that training. And the next one, please. Louise also mentioned implementation, and there's a lot of support here for this too, which is really, really important to the process. So on the initial training day, when the EFA mentor comes in, they work with the leadership team. We've got a really carefully planned implementation support activity, which lays out all of the steps that schools may wish to take. There may be some, and the school and leadership teams work through, think about what they will want to prioritize, when they're going to be delivering particular activities, and equally saying which things maybe aren't right for them. There's not a one size fits all, but there is a really clear and carefully thought out support package around implementation, so that as schools start the process of working through the programme, they know where they're heading, they're setting their own benchmarks, their own points for reflection, and the EFA mentors work alongside leadership teams to make sure that whatever is set up is sustainable and realistic. I think that's my last slide, but I'm very happy whenever it's appropriate to take questions. Just to say quickly, there's a lot of information about this on our website. And we've just really delighted that we've got another 20 places available on this, but it is very booked up. So if you are interested in getting involved, I would suggest getting in touch really as quickly as you can, because it has been very popular, hence the expansion of it. Also to mention that Dillon William is running a number of free events next week, so it's short notice, but there are still spaces on 3 out of the 4 of them, and some of them are not too far away from you. So again, I'll post the link to that in the chat for you, but if you can, and if you think you might be interested in this, do get involved and go along to those events. Even if you think this isn't right for you right now, go along to the events and find out more. There's still a really great opportunity, and an unusual opportunity actually, just to have a day with Dillon William in person. He's based in the States these days. So I'll post those links in the chat, but very happy to take any questions afterwards. And thank you very much for having me along this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Alex. That was really clear. So if anybody's got any questions based on this particular subsidised programme, then please put them in the chat. We just had one general question, which is, do schools need to have a certain percentage of disadvantaged students to take part? And the answer is no for all of these things, because it's a broad base of evidence. What the reports usually do is report on the results of children on free school meals and those that are not on free school meals as a comparison. So actually we do need a broad base of pupils as part of these trials and programmes as well.
Yeah. And the subsidised version of this is available to anybody in the education investment areas. And I can give you the exact figures. It costs £1,324.75 plus VAT to take part in the EFA programme, which against a usual price of £5,299. So it's a really significant discount.
Yeah, it's an absolute bargain
if people want to get involved.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Alex.
Pleasure.
So Paula, are you ready to, do you want to
I am.
shout me to move the slides on?
Yeah, thank you. So the switch on intervention has been run since 2009. It is a reading intervention for the lowest readers. So it's under reading age of 9 years old. So particularly we're finding that it's needed in secondary schools at the moment. If you can move it on, please, Louise. So I'm just going to first of all tell you what the switch on reading session looks like, really, or what the programme looks like, and then talk to you about our involvement with the EEF. We train teaching assistants, librarians or teachers, because it's a one-to-one programme. It runs for 20 minutes every day for 10 weeks. That's the expectation that gets the best results. And it's a personalised approach. So it isn't scripted, but it does demand the adult to have close observation of the students' reading behaviours, their difficulties, their barriers, so that they can give really precise feedback. The focus is really developing decoding, word reading, but also fluency and comprehension skills, because we're finding at the moment that there's a big gap between students being able to read words and also understand them. And we think that the bridge between those two is fluency, that automatic reading and making it sound right, that will help the comprehension. But it isn't a comprehension only intervention. So if you have students who are able to read the words but not able to understand, switch on would not be for them. You'd be needing a comprehension intervention instead. And you can see there at the bottom, it's really about that close observation of one single student, so we can give really strategy-based feedback that's specific to them. This intervention is for those students who won't make progress in a group or class setting. We're trying to, yes, increase their confidence and interest in reading, but that only happens if they have success. So that's why that adult intervention is really important. We're trying to support them to establish a kind of independent active problem solving with their reading, because this is often these students are often the ones who are given a lot of adult support, but we're trying to move them across to more independent work. And we're building a broad range of strategies because a lot of these students have had phonics in primary school, which has been taught well, but they need something alongside that to really shift them with their reading. And of course, we're trying to increase reading mileage because these students tend to be the ones that don't choose to read. Why choose to do something you find difficult? So we're within that 20-minute session, they're reading parts of 4 books. Thanks, Louise. So where our involvement with EF is concerned, we were actually the first efficacy project that had a positive outcome a long while ago. I think we're now on about our 7th project with the EF. These are the results of the secondary trial that we had, the efficacy trial, and you can see there these additional months progress were gained within the 10 weeks. So this is additional to their peers, and it had the particularly good impact on the lowest attainers. Also, which isn't quoted there, a really good impact on students with EAL as well. So as long as those EAL students have been in school or in the country speaking English for at least 1 to 2 terms, they would then be find Switch On a real benefit. Thank you, Louise. So this is what the project looks like for Switch On, really. As I said, it's for the lowest of readers that have a particular issue around decoding that hasn't clicked for them yet. The adults that we train are teachers, teaching assistants, librarians, so they have to have some qualification within working with students. We are asking for 2 adults to deliver to 2 students each. Now that's at least 2 students each because they need to see that comparison of accelerated learning. But we also want an intervention lead to attend so that those adults can be supported. What we find is that when a teaching assistant goes off and does some training and comes back and tries to implement something, it isn't necessarily sustained. So having somebody to support them to monitor that's in management level is going to have a much better impact on the students' progress. The training is 2 half-days online training initially, which sets them off to be able to deliver the intervention. And then we have the trainers will then do an online virtual visit where they'll watch each of the adults who is delivering Switch On deliver a session, discuss the students, talk about next steps. We found that one hit training is just not enough. It's a lot to take in. So it has more of an impact when the adults can discuss a particular student's learning. And then that's followed up by the schools coming together for a half-day online training. The trainer will identify specific aspects that they want to pick up in that half-day training, the last half day, from the visits that they've had with the different schools. So that's the kind of training model, if you like. We will provide schools with a folder, 2 folders of all the resources and the training so that they can go back and have a look at that. But all of that is also available electronically as well, including film of the sessions so that the trainees can see what it looks like in its entirety as a session. Also, as part of this, there are very finely levelled books within a Switch On book pack, and schools get 2 of those. So there's 36 books, I think, in each. The cost, again, is, as Alex was saying, this is subsidised. So the cost to schools is only £820. So that's a considerable reduction. Thanks, Louise. I think we'll go on to the next one. So we need you to register in interest by April because this project is finishing in May. Our last training is the last week of May. So there, I think Louise has also got a longer webinar which gives more information, which you'll be sending out, I presume, Louise, to schools. And you can find more information on that website link there as well. Thank you very much. As I said, if there's any questions, then please let me know.
Thanks very much, Paula. Yeah, we'll send that additional webinar through with the information we send out after this. So that's both of those subsidised programmes that are available to secondary schools in this area. And then the final thing is just to give you an idea of the trials that the EF are recruiting to that are relevant to secondary schools. So Accents for Science isn't available in our Greater Manchester area. That's only for the Liverpool side, but we have got English Mastery that we can access. For post-16, we've got the 5 R's maths approach to GCSE resits. As a college, we've signed up for that. We're already part of that programme. And then there's the Bit Up attendance trial that they are recruiting to across Key Stage 3 to Key Stage 5 as well. And there are other pilot evaluation opportunities. So we will send the links through for all of those. But if you go on the website, you can see the projects and the pilot opportunities that are available to secondary schools in there. So you can scan this now, or we will send you the links when we send the recording out to everybody as well. And I've noticed that Lorna is also posting all those links individually into the chat as well. So that is the end of our presentation on those projects. What we'd really like you to think about is, what is your priority as a school? What is the thing that you think you need to address? And do those projects fit in any way? And to be honest, knowing the priorities in Greater Manchester in terms of the priority education investment areas, certainly in Oldham and Tameside, formative assessment is coming out in a lot of school priorities, but also issues with reading in year 7. So I think this is a project that could be something that's really exciting as part of the development that's going on in schools as well. So I'd just like to end by thanking Alex and Paula for their time. I really appreciate that, and the fact that you've stayed on later than we anticipated as well. And thank you everybody for joining, and I'm going to stop the recording there. Thanks very much, everybody.